Alright, here's what I'm going to talk about today. When I was 14 years old, my father took me and Mark Warren to San Francisco, a theater in San Francisco, for the grand opening of a documentary about Arnold Schwarzenegger called Pumping Iron. I was already a bodybuilder at that time. Actually, I was an Olympic weightlifter at 13. I was #1 in the nation as an Olympic weightlifter at the age of 13 in the 148-pound class. Became a bodybuilder. And the thing is, I was the low self-esteem guy. There was a lot of guys like me in high school. Low self-esteem guy. Socially awkward, no communication skills, unable to look people directly in the eye, disoriented, full of repression and full of repressed anger. And there was a lot of guys like me. I was the low self-esteem guy. And I became a bodybuilder, and I hung out with other bodybuilders, and we had an us versus them mentality. We were like, look at all these average guys out there. The average man is a disgusting, bloated tomato with 4 toothpicks sticking out of him. And look at us. We are gods. We are sculptures. We are amazing. And clearly, this braggadocio, this arrogance, this us versus them mentality was rooted in childishness and fear and insecurity and low self-esteem. And that was the fuel for this, for what was my first foray into tribalism. So I went to college and I stopped hanging out with my bodybuilding buddies. And I simply transferred the same mentality as a bodybuilder to being the intellectual. Now I was reading books like a demon. I shut myself off from society for the most part, read books like a demon, and I couldn't read enough because to compensate for low self-esteem, I had to be smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. Of course, I would hang out with people who were like me, and we had this excessive pride, and we thought, oh, we're intellectuals, we're cosmopolitan, and look at all the masses out there, the sheep, the herd, you know how dumb they are. And it was the same mentality, it was the same tribalism. And as I look back on the embarrassment of my youthful existence, I have to say, I think that's kind of a natural part of growing up. You know, you're young and you're scared and you're insecure, and you try to create this tribe. And this tribe makes you feel protected and it makes you feel above it all. And I'd like to think that we would outgrow that and move on to the next phase. But what I see living in America today is that tribalism is flourishing even in adults more than ever. And I think it's dangerous because what you need for civilization is you need people to have a common ground. You need fences to be mended, and you need people to get along. And we live in a society of fractured tribalists, hostile, suspicious, antagonistic toward one another, and it seems to be getting worse. And I'm not opposed to a certain type of tribalism. I think it's natural. I think instinctively we want to have a group. We want to have belonging. Isn't that a natural instinct? I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint, we are stronger when we find out how to find belonging into a group. We learn how to cooperate within a group. And so I think that makes sense to me. I also can understand tribalism because we're so hungry for an identity, and your tribe gives you a narrative about your life. It gives you a narrative that gives you meaning. And you know, the world is crazy. If you can find a tribe that gives you a meaningful narrative, that gives you identity in this crazy world, I could see that being very appealing. The problem is that tribalism has gotten out of control. It's gotten out of hand. And the question is why? Why is it so dangerous now? What do I mean by that? What I mean is that now people are tribalists in the most extreme manner. They've become what I call conspiracy theorists. whereas they cherry pick information. They cherry pick information that's not credible, and then when you show them credible information, they say to you, oh, you're just an elitist. Your opinion, your information is no better than mine. I got it on Google and it's just as good. And so you can't even have an intellectual debate with someone who's a conspiracy theorist. There's a certain amount of narcissism in that. There's a certain amount of immaturity in that I see flourishing. And then, of course, with social media, you can reinforce your confirmation bias you could by finding tribes in the digital world. So that's become a huge factor. And so now what you have are tribes that are embracing what we call alternative facts, fake news, and all in the service of social media. And so what's the cause of this? What happened? Well, it's interesting. I think if I had to say one word, it would be fear. And what's the cause of the fear? Check this out. In the 1980s, the average American had 4 friends. Today, less than 2. And do you have an explanation for that, McMahon? Yeah, I do. I think Americans today are busy. I think Americans are just working their butts off, and when they get home, they're tired. And when I talk to my students about this, they're like, yeah, man, I got no time for friends. I come home, I'm exhausted. My parents are exhausted. Who has time for friends anymore? And so with a lack of friendship comes fear, isolation, anxiety. And from isolation and anxiety and fear, you're going to try to find some kind of tribe. Could be on social media. Here's another thing about fear. Since about 1980, any economist will tell you real wages have gone down every year since 1980. Think about that. If real wages go down every year, then that means structural inequality has gotten worse every year. When I speak of structural inequality, I'm talking about the cost of education, talking about the cost of housing, and the cost of medical care. Imagine how terrifying it is for an American today to have to work his or her butt off just to stay afloat, whereas an American didn't have to do that 30, 40 years ago. I mean, don't even get me started on the 1960s. You know, these Americans working one job with a 2-story house, boats, multiple cars. I remember back in the 60s, Americans would get a new car every 3 years like it was nothing. And those are crazy times. Those days are over. So I think in a society of fear, we want to find a tribe. The fear, the anxiety, and the isolation is probably so bad, I don't even know if we're aware of how scared we are, because it kind of happens gradually. One of the biggest pieces of evidence of this fear is, man, every time I go on the news, there's like another mass shooting. I mean, so we're all scared because this is something that happens too often. That as I make this video, there was another mass shooting at a high school in Texas near Houston. And I just feel like I just read about one a couple days ago. And then before that, of course, we had one in Florida a month and a half ago or so. And so we don't know where to go. And so what we have to do is we have to find some kind of tribe. It could be on social media. And the problem is, I think these tribes, they manipulate reality just to appease the preconceived worldview of the person. And it's getting worse. Is it going to get better, McMahon? Well, I want to believe so. I have to believe so. I have 2 daughters, 8-year-old daughters. And I would like, here's what I think about this. I think the extreme tribes that are like the trolls of America, they're probably 20-30% of America. I think most of us are reasonable, and I would hope that the powers of reason win out. I just fear that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I'm trying to stay out of tribes these days, because I remember how excessively proud I was and arrogant, and I don't want to go back to those days again. All right, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm out.